Is translation an art, a craft, a profession, a science, or a form of Kung Fu? What role do translation theory and translation studies play in teaching of translation? What role is appropriate for the study of translation history? These were the questions discussed at a Taining public forum on the topic Teaching Translation, Practice and/or Theory, held at the Ouhk on 14th of July 2006. Several distinguished scholars were invited to express their views. What follows represents the lively discussion that took place and the wide variety of views and positions that were taken. Let's begin with Professor Minford.
Translation is that it brings people together in an activity which is creative and fulfilling, and sharing that activity creates a camaraderie. And I feel incredibly privileged to have many friends who are translators and teachers of translation who have made my life a better thing, and whose friendship and camaraderie I really appreciate. And for me, this evening is partly a way of celebrating and affirming that. Right, so I thought I'd begin with a very general, but in a way quite provocative question, which is this: is translation an art? Is it a craft? Is it a profession? Is it a science? Or is it a form of Kung Fu? Right?
Anyway, I think I like the word Kung Fu, because really reminds me of the Zhao Xingqi movie, Kung Fu, and we could all learn to do translation like that. I think we'll be all right. And in that particular movie, I think Kung Fu was a kind of communication actually between people, and then you sort of hit somebody, and then somebody would receive it. Yeah, so I think that basically is it. Whether or not that particular person would get hurt, is it a matter? But coming back to the question of art, craft, profession, or science, I think, well, translation, is all of them. I think it really depends on the text type. In art, I think we all have done literary translation, poetry, drama, and fiction, and all that. I think really, there's something that you can't really learn, or something you sort of is right inside you, or in your training, in your background, and things like that. And I do believe there's a kind of qi, this kind of I don't know what to call it, air or vital kind of a spirit or whatever that really you can feel when you're doing translation. When you're doing translation, I think especially with poetry, that you do feel that there's certain kind of a channel, a particular channel of communication with the author, or with the poem, or with the literary work itself. Otherwise, I don't think you're doing a good job. But on the other hand, when we're doing maybe scientific, technological translation, or government document, or university stuff, that kind of thing, which you hate, I know. Yeah. Then I think it's something like a science, because you have to be exact, you have to be logical, you have to be accurate. So I think it really depends on the text type that you're doing. But I always kind of leaning towards art, because I've done a lot of literary translation, and I really think that well, there's something that's inside every literary translator, which really he or she receive from his or her training, or maybe from whatever education, or even something from heaven. Because sometimes I do feel inspired, really, by the poem, or by what what's on my mind. And I think it's that kind of thing at that particular moment that you really think of. Now, what is translation? It's not a science, it's an art.
Of course, yes, inspiration the original sense of the word means spiro in Latin, means to breathe. The god breathes inspiration into you. The god Apollo breathes into you, and you speak the god's voice. Of course that happens to us, but more often when you're wrestling with the text, Kung Fu interests me, this metaphor. I tend to think of it more in terms of a boxing match. You know, the poet hits me with a mixed metaphor, so I whack him with some alliteration, and we, between ourselves, we fight our way through to the resolution of this, and I'm not going to let him beat me. So the Kung Fu in that sense, yes, the struggle between voice and voice, between text and text, but actually, really, I think translation is something that's not on here. Okay. It's about sex. Or it's like sex. It's far more rewarding to do it than to talk about it, which is my opening statement on the theory versus practice thing.
So it's good you can talk about the art or in literary translation. But this list actually reminds me of Peter Newmark, which I teach every day, because Newmark says translation is an art, it's a craft, it's a science, and lastly, translation is a matter of taste. And I think the last, the matter of taste, has to do with the inspiration and sex. It does, you know. Yes, indeed. But we have to think about, as people in this room and people, translators in Hong Kong, we have to think of other translations, as Professor Fong said, other types. So may not be that artistic, but it still takes a lot of功夫in doing any kind of translation. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I tend to take a sort of shifting point of view with regard to that. I see Peter Newmark creeping into our discussion. I see text type creeping into our discussion. So everything is creeping into a discussion. But I tend to take theory, since we're talking about, well, I'm going to introduce theory. Okay. And basically, your question is really also about theory. So I tend to take it as a kind of all-purpose scout knife. You know, when I need to do something, then, you know, if I want to peel an orange, then I use it. If I want to use it as a bottle opener, I use it. So I think I just use it. So it depends on the occasion and on the situation. So let me give an example. Just now we talk about text type. But very often what I find is that even when you are translating a particular type of text and you think that it's very clear, there's no problem whatsoever, then you almost always have to shift your position. I'll give an example. I was once in Shanghai, and we had a conference. And then after the conference, we went for sightseeing to Hangzhou. And then we went to the Ling'en Si. And then together with a group of translation scholars from different parts of the world. And then I didn't want to join them because I didn't want to turn myself into a tour guide. So I just, you know, look at the scenery by myself, and then my attention was caught by a notice.